The fate of the world appears to be sealed as his comrades have fallen, and the kingdom's 10 mightiest knights have all been drained of their vitality and life force. The land has become polluted, and death looms over it without any hope of salvation. And the culprit responsible for this devastation? Well, it is none other than one of the Demon King's commanders, Gluttony. The tale commences with our main character, a knight known as Tiny, contrary to his physique, who wields a hammer. In the midst of fallen comrades, Tiny engages in a fight with Gluttony, the commander of the demons, who appears wounded with a missing left arm and a quarter of his head bashed in. As Tiny readies himself for a final blow amid the corpses of his companions, Gluttony teases him and acknowledges his power. Despite the taunts, Tiny remains unfazed and unleashes a powerful attack called Lightning Wallop, which Gluttony blocks with a single arm. Following Gluttony's taunting, urging Tiny to surrender, Tiny becomes even more agitated and decides to employ another potent technique known as Meteor Obligation. This maneuver cleanly severs Gluttony's head, causing an explosion. "Peace at last," uttered Tiny, as he knelt amid the craters created by the explosion. He noticed a hole in his abdomen and came to the realization that his chances of survival were slim. Attempting to heal himself with mana, Tiny discovered to his dismay that he had depleted his reserves. A wave of memories flooded his mind, reflecting on his past experiences and the path that led him to become a knight. He pondered how, with proper training in mana, particularly given his innate abilities, he could have potentially saved the continent and its inhabitants. After defeating one of the 7 commanders of the Demon King, who was rumored to be the weakest, Tiny couldn't help but wonder about the strength of the remaining commanders and the Demon King himself. Lost in thought, his contemplation was interrupted by the Sword Emperor, Asgard von Valentia. Despite appearing severely injured and brutalized, Asgard chuckled and acknowledged the possibility of his impending demise. Nonetheless, he wanted to know why Tiny didn't flee from the battle after all of his comrades were defeated. Perplexed, Tiny implored Asgard to elaborate further. In response, Asgard pointed out that, as a child from the slums with nothing to cherish or defend, there was no reason for Tiny to remain and fight when all of his allies had been defeated. Understanding the implication of Asgard's words, Tiny let out a sigh, expressing that what he was about to admit was somewhat humiliating. Tiny revealed to Asgard that he despised feeling weak or inadequate, as he believed that a true man should exude confidence in every aspect of life and never back down from a fight. This declaration elicited laughter from Asgard, which surprised Tiny. Impressed by Tiny's resolve, Asgard urged him to seek him out when he returned, much to Tiny's bewilderment as he questioned what Asgard meant. However, Asgard didn't provide a direct response and instead suggested that his past self wouldn't have believed Tiny if he had informed him that he hailed from the future. Therefore, he would share one of his secrets with him. As a peculiar ring on Asgard's finger radiated with an otherworldly glow, he divulged that his daughter's birth name was Lila, which was derived from the flower lily that he and his wife favored. However, the truth was that he didn't particularly care for that flower. Asgard breathed his final words, "Come and find me as soon as possible," before passing away. Suddenly, a cerulean aura enveloped Tiny, leaving him bewildered, and causing him to lose consciousness. When he awoke, Tiny found himself in a room that appeared to be familiar. Initially, he believed he was experiencing flashbacks before his demise. However, his attention was drawn to his deceased sister lying beside him, and he quickly realized that this was a memory from his past. Recalling the moment, 2 men entered and removed his sister's body because of a golden ring that Tiny was given. Unfortunately, his sister was brutally beaten to death for it. As expected, 2 men burst into the room and started to haul away Tiny's sister's lifeless body. This agitated Tiny, and he questioned why he couldn't protect his sister's body even in his dreams. Despite struggling to move his body, Tiny's arm began to twitch, and he lunged at one of the attackers. The attackers became furious and launched a fearless assault on Tiny. Despite this, he bravely endured all the attacks while shielding his sister's body. Eventually, the 2 assailants gave up and left after witnessing Tiny's persistence. It was then that Tiny noticed a blue aura surrounding his body which he identified as mana. He realized that he had never been able to use mana before at his current age, and this led him to briefly recall Asgard's words about being sent back to the past. As he realized that it was not a dream, a menacing expression appeared on his face as he understood that he had the power to alter the future. Initially, Tiny started to lament, wishing that Asgard had sent him back further in time so he could have saved his sister. However, he quickly dismissed those thoughts and found solace in the fact that he now had his sister's body and could perform a proper ceremony. In his mind, he requested that the Sword Emperor wait for a while as Tiny had a score to settle with the person who killed his sister, Wolf. He recollected that in his previous life, he could barely defeat Wolf, but this time, he intended to take his time and savor his victory. We see Tiny outside, surrounded by a group of individuals who were performing a burial ceremony for his sister, Erina. Although they were not related by blood, they shared many similarities. Both had black hair and eyes, which were a rarity in the continent, and as a result, most people avoided harming them, believing they might belong to a lost noble family. Tiny remembered how Erina used to tell him that he reminded her of her lost brother and named him Tiny. She had always shown him unconditional love and affection. Tiny was grateful that this time around, he could at least provide Erina with a proper funeral. As Tiny was lost in his thoughts, his sister's friend, Emma, couldn't help but stare at him, noticing the sudden change in his behavior. She remembered how he had been eating soup in front of his sister's lifeless body as if nothing had happened. Emma also noticed that Tiny's injuries from his encounters with the wolf companion had instantly healed, and his manner of speaking and handling the situation was unusual for a 10-year-old child. As the ritual was about to be finalized, Tiny remembered his sister's words and looked up to the sky, urging her to watch over him as he promised not to have any regrets this time around. A month later, we see Tiny fully immersed in mana as he gracefully prepares himself to head over to Wolf's hideout. As he arrives at the entrance of the hideout, he encounters two guards standing in front of the door who recognize him. Tiny, with a menacing stare, questions the guards about Wolf's whereabouts, but they refuse to answer and appear displeased by his arrogance. One of the guards steps up to him and tries to slap Tiny, but he grabs the guard's hands and instantly breaks them, leaving him screaming in pain. The other guard, seemingly shocked by the outcome, tries to grab Tiny, but he is surprised to discover how heavy he is. This prompts him to wonder why a 10-year-old is so heavy. Tiny then gives the guard a terrifying glare before knocking him to the ground. As the guard tries to crawl his way to safety, Tiny walks up to him, pleased that he was able to achieve a mana technique called Mana Body. It's a powerful technique that greatly increases a person's physical attributes, which he created. Although the technique requires one to consume an absurd amount of food, Tiny is glad that he was able to achieve it, recalling that he was unable to do so in his past life. With this, Tiny grabs the leg of the seemingly frightened guard and throws him towards the hideout door, breaking it. This alerts everyone inside the hideout, and Tiny steps in without a word, menacingly and brutally beating up everyone in the lair with his bare fists. This bloodbath catches the attention of two twin brothers with red hair who are shocked to see a child who can use mana at such a young age. They both attack Tiny simultaneously, but he, with his profound knowledge in martial arts, swiftly takes them down. Tiny proceeds to Wolf's office, recalling that in his previous life he was surprised to discover that Wolf was a member of the Beast tribe. Additionally, among the opponents he faced, there was a silver wolf known to be extremely powerful. In his past life, he couldn't find out why there was a silver wolf among them due to the intense battle. However, this time around, armed with knowledge from one of the 10 strongest knights in the kingdom, he is determined to find out. When Tiny arrived at the office of Wolf, he spotted Wolf in his humanoid form. Upon realizing that Tiny was responsible for causing damage to his hood, Wolf transformed into a werewolf and attacked Tiny. However, Tiny was able to easily avoid Wolf's attack and retaliated by crushing Wolf's nose. This caused Wolf to become enraged and he launched a series of attacks at Tiny, which he effortlessly dodged. While dodging, Tiny remembered the advice of a former fellow member of his gang who had instructed him on how to deal with a berserk wolf, which was to beat them until they calmed down. Tiny started to use this technique and launched several powerful punches and kicks at Wolf. Despite Wolf's pleas for mercy, Tiny continued to beat him until he was satisfied. After the beating, Wolf began to beg for forgiveness and apologize for his actions towards Tiny's sister, Elena. However, Tiny was not satisfied with Wolf's apologies and questioned why a beastman would be in such a rundown hood. Suddenly, Tiny noticed a strange-looking stone that he had not seen before. When he picked up the stone, it emitted a large amount of demonic energy and revealed a mirage of a silver wolf trapped within it. As Tiny held the stone, he recalled a fragment of his past life when his comrade, Estina, an elf beast tamer and one of the 10 strongest knights, spoke to him about spirit animals and their core, the spirit stone. He realized that the stone he was holding was a spirit stone, but was puzzled as to why it was filled with demonic energy. Despite this, he decided to break the demonic chain that was surrounding the wolf, which resulted in the spirit stone transforming into a giant silver wolf. As the wolf transformed, Tiny was suddenly able to see a fragment of its memories. He saw how the wolf had been captured by a group of people using demonic ki, and turned into the spirit stone, which was then given to a young wolf, turning him into a beast wolf. As Tiny put the pieces together, he realized that these mysterious individuals were creating beast men by having people absorb spirit stones. As he tried to interrogate Wolf, the silver wolf suddenly charged towards him, but Tiny managed to stop it and urged it to listen to him. He explained that Wolf deserved a more painful death. The wolf nodded in agreement, leaving Tiny confused as to how it understood him. The wolf then revealed that when Tiny freed him, he accidentally fused a bit of his mana into the spirit stone, which allowed them to communicate telepathically and can also help them form a contract, only under the condition that Tiny helps him get revenge on the people who had captured him, whom Tiny recognized as demonic worshippers. Tiny was excited and proceeded to form a contract with the wolf, naming it Lunar Wolf. He then proceeded to interrogate Wolf, asking if the person who gave him the spirit stone was a member of the demonic worshippers. However, Wolf kept speaking incoherently, as he was suffering from deja vu caused by the beating. Tiny then instructed Lunar to wake him up, which the wolf did by letting out a terrifying roar. Upon regaining his composure, Tiny questioned Wolf again, but he continued to speak incoherently, saying things like he's a test subject and the organization won't let go of him. Just as Wolf was about to reveal something about a great power they possessed, his head suddenly exploded, much to Tiny's shock. He soon realized that there must have been an enchantment placed on Wolf's mouth, which was similar to what had happened in his previous life. Suddenly, Tiny spotted a magic circle on the wall and, using Wolf's dead body, he smashed through the wall, revealing a safe. Realizing that the magic circle was a lock, Tiny used Wolf's hands to open it, revealing a treasure trove, including the Valentina family ring, which he decided to keep. He remembered that the golden ring had been given to him by Asgard's daughter, Chloe von Valentia, but it had been stolen by Wolf and his gang. Realizing that it would be a useful asset in meeting Asgard, he kept it in his pocket and wondered where a certain guy was. Our attention is suddenly drawn to a knight commander, Lamb, who was brought by some of Wolf's minions to handle Tiny. Lamb asked if Tiny was responsible for the mess, and Tiny admitted to it in a rude manner. Angered, Lamb, a second-level mana user, charged at Tiny, but he easily deflected it and landed a knee to the face which Lamb barely blocked. Their fight continued for a while, and Lamb was forced to bring out his sword, prompting Tiny to unleash his spirit beast, Lunar, which sent a chill down Lamb's spine. However, Tiny decided not to proceed with the fight and asked if he could settle the matter with money. Lamb, shocked to hear such words coming from a kid, was impressed and agreed to it. After the negotiation, Lamb agreed to leave and Wolf's minions were afraid. As Lamb was leaving, Tiny called out to him and told him to report the incident to the estate lord, saying that he should take responsibility as the new owner of the destroyed property. As Wolf's minions tried to flee, Tiny stopped them and ordered them to gather their gang, the women who worked in the invader, and the children who begged on the streets and bring them to the destroyed property within an hour. He threatened to kill them if they failed to do so. The minions arrived on time with the requested people and Emma immediately rushed to Tiny, seemingly shocked at the sight of blood on his hands. However, Tiny revealed that it wasn't his blood, but that of those on the ground, leaving Emma and everyone around them shocked. Tiny then pulled out a book, which he revealed to the others as an account book that vividly exposed all of the fraudulent activities committed by the estate lord. Initially confused by this revelation, Tiny urged them not to worry and explained that they were now free from the wolves and could live their lives in peace. Tiny advised them to take revenge on the wolves before leaving, which piqued the interest of everyone gathered. They hurriedly attacked the injured wolf men on the ground. After they were satisfied with their revenge, Tiny unveiled a safe filled with treasure that caught everyone's attention. Some even contemplated taking everything for themselves. However, Tiny then summoned his spirit beast and warned them with a menacing glare that any attempt to steal from each other would result in Lunar killing everyone without exception. Afterwards, he instructed them to divide the money evenly and suggested a location for them to relocate and begin a new life. Emma interrupted him, voicing her concerns about how he would manage on his own as he was still a child. However, Tiny reassured her, insisting that he was capable of looking after himself. With this, they parted ways. Several days later, Tiny made his way to the residence of the estate lord. Upon arrival, he was confronted by two guards who tried to dismiss him, questioning why a child like him would want to see their employer. Without responding, Tiny summoned his spirit beast, causing the guards to tremble with fear and comply with his demands. Upon entering the estate, Tiny met Kron, the Grand Master of File's Night Order. Kron mentioned that he had heard a lot about Tiny from Lamb. In response, Tiny made a rude comment that greatly angered Kron, and they engaged in an unfriendly banter, eventually leading Kron to draw his sword. However, the butler present intervened, informing Kron that the Lord had personally invited Tiny. With no other option, Kron allowed Tiny to proceed and accompanied him to the estate lord's office. However, upon entering, Tiny was taken aback by the appearance of the estate lord. That's all for now. Comment down below if you want a part 2.